The Denver Broncos collapse in the second half of Sunday's action against the Tennessee Titans, and they now fall to 3-6, despite holding Derrick Henry to under 60 yards rushing. What went wrong with the Broncos in this game, and is the season officially over? You get that and much more in today's brand new Locked On Broncos post-game report.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, or whether you watch on YouTube, whether the Broncos win or whether they lose. Thank you so much. From the South Stands to the end zone, I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. And the Broncos unfortunately dropping to 3-6 on the season after a promising first half for this Broncos team. The second half proved to be they are who we thought they were. The same old Broncos returned in the second half action against the Tennessee Titans as they collapsed essentially and lost the game. And there was a multitude of things in this game in particular that really equated to the loss. And I think one thing we can pinpoint, we can look at the X's and O's stuff. We'll dive into the injuries on the Broncos side. That obviously factors into it. But at the end of the day, one of the bigger storylines here with this Broncos team, you see the benefit. You see the coaching aspect that you saw with Tennessee. I would say this. In the first half, the Broncos, they jumped off to a 10-0 lead over the Tennessee Titans, and they couldn't build on it from that standpoint. And it led to a little bit of a 2-minute drive by the Titans. At the end of the first half, they scored on 3rd and 9. That's obviously something you don't want to allow happen. But when the Titans were down 10-0, they didn't panic. They didn't have that pressure on them, essentially. And that touchdown right before halftime really was a momentum swinger for Tennessee, and really going against Denver. At that point, we were wondering, is this going to be where Denver lets the game get out of their grasp a little bit? And surely enough, it did lead to that, because in the third quarter, the Titans would come out on fire. The Broncos would punt the football away on their first possession of the second half. And then Tennessee, they would score on a trick play, a 63-yard flea flicker. Damari Mathis and P.J. Locke bumped into one each other, and that led to wide open, obviously, Westbrook-Ikhine for a touchdown that gave them, at that point, a 14-10 lead. And that would really be the difference maker in this game, is the defense for the most part. I think it'll be lost in this loss that we're talking about here. The defense did their part. Yeah, you don't want to allow that touchdown before halftime. That's one part. You don't want to allow the 63-yard broken play off of a flea flicker to where you bump into each other defensively and allow a guy to go free for a big-time touchdown. Those were defining moments. And yes, the Broncos defense, they surrendered 14 points. But for a majority of that game, they did exactly what was advertised against a very, very tough Derrick Henry-led Titans team. I mean, they held Derrick Henry to 53 total yards, folks. And we said that was one of the keys to the game. If the Broncos can come out and limit Derrick Henry and slow him down, they have a great chance of winning. However, the third quarter Broncos offense peered its head here once again. They had 18 total plays in the third quarter alone for only 51 yards, and they had 3 punts. They simply couldn't move the ball. They simply couldn't capitalize on it. And there were some injuries that happened, and we'll touch on a little bit later here, especially on the offensive side of the ball. But really, this was the story for this Broncos team going in on the road. They came out, and what impressed me was their first half. They just came out, and they had a different mentality, a different attitude to them. And then Jalen Virgil stepped up in a big-time way after Jerry Jeudy's injury. Same with Kendall Hinton. And just from that point forward, I mean, Denver couldn't get a spark on the offensive side of the ball. They had several plays, but then once again, the old, hey, there's a flag on the play, there's holding, there's false start, there's sacks given up. It's the same story for this Broncos offense. And going back to my original point, the Titans coaching was a difference in this game versus the Broncos coaching. And once again, here we are talking about the Broncos losing yet another one-score possession. It's disappointing. And for everybody in Broncos country, I've talked to a lot of Broncos fans on the way out of the stadium, and they were just disappointed, dejected, saying, wow, we didn't expect this to happen this season. In Broncos country, rightfully so, you have every right to be frustrated and upset about it, because this is not the Broncos team that was as advertised, that we had high expectations for, that we, myself included, have hyped up. And rightfully, Broncos fans deserve a little bit more, and unfortunately, it's just the offense is in their way in such a big way. We don't have all the answers to try to piece things together and figure out how things are going to go, but this is the reality of the Broncos. Now they sit at 3-6, which begs the question, is this season officially over from an optics standpoint? That's going to be something we dive into coming up here in just a moment. On top of that, we're going to talk about the injury bug biting the Broncos once again, and this time a key player at the wide receiver position. But before we do that, folks, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's episode of the show. It's our good friends over there, Total Wine and More. And this holiday, find what you love at Total Wine and More. With so many great bottles to choose from, it's easy to find a new favorite single barrel bourbon or the perfect gift for everyone on your list with some help from a friendly guide. And with all the confidence of knowing you found something special for the lowest price, find what you love what you find. Only at Total Wine and More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly. Be 21. The injury bug has come back to bite the Denver Broncos here once again to open up the second half of the season in a disappointing road loss against the Tennessee Titans. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. Whether you listen on your favorite audio podcasting platform or whether you watch on YouTube, thank you so much, whether the Broncos win or lose, for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, use the comment section down below to vent about the Broncos. What was the most disappointing part of Sunday's game for you? What type of changes need to be made going forward with this team? Drop those comments down below if you were watching on YouTube. But we're talking about some big-time injury news right now here for this Broncos team. I mean, it's a team that is riddled with them. Right now, we talked about Baron Browning missing the game with a hip flexor. Justin Simmons missing it with a knee sprain. Could need another week, according to Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett, which begs the question, how many more injuries can this team sustain before they start to drop off a little bit? Defensively, I don't think Denver's really missed a beat with some of the injuries that they've had. That's been a really good sign to see there. But on the offensive side of the ball, injuries are piling up, and one of them coming at the wide receiver position. Now, earlier in the week, the Broncos lost KJ Hamler in practice to a hamstring injury, non-contact, forcing him to miss this game, and they're going to continue to evaluate his options. But Jerry Jeudy, on the first play of the game here for the Broncos, Russell Wilson was looking to go deep to him. Jeudy planted his foot and it gave out, non-contact. He was seen in the locker room with a walking boot. Now, he went down, and the initial thought was, everyone was wondering, is it an Achilles, things like that? Obviously, that is not the case so far, as it's been reported. It's not the Achilles, but there is something in the back of the ankle, and Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett told us after the game in the locker room that they think that they dodged a bullet. They're hoping they dodged a bullet with Jeudy's injury. But at this point in time, him being in a walking boot, now the Broncos having to shift their focus to take on the Las Vegas Raiders this week at home, Empower Field, a Mile High. Already down KJ Hamler, they have to rely on some guys that aren't quite proven just yet in the National Football League, but it did present an opportunity for the Broncos offense to get some guys involved, a little bit more acclimated, and we're going to talk about the depth right now at this position, featuring Cortland Sutton, Kendall Hinton, who stepped up in a big way on Sunday for the Broncos, especially after Jerry Jeudy's injury, Jalen Virgil, who had one catch for 66 yards, his first career catch in the National Football League, and it was a big one, and it was for a touchdown. The rookie has been working his tail off in practice. Had a chance to speak with him briefly after the game and just noted he's been grinding every single day since making the 53-man roster to finally get his opportunity. And unfortunately, the opportunity came due to injury, but Virgil made the most of his opportunity on Sunday. Maybe it's something the Broncos can build on along the way. After Jalen Virgil, you have Montrell Washington, who's obviously involved in the return game here for this Broncos football team, and then Tyree Cleveland, a key special teams ace. Right now, Denver's depth is ultimately tested at the wide receiver position, which could prompt up this upcoming week. We could see Brandon Johnson elevated from the practice squad to the active roster, depending on the severity of Jerry Jeudy's injury. But the Broncos will need an all-hands-on-deck approach going forward, especially at the wide receiver position. I mean, coming into this season, I think the expectations we all had was, okay, hey, the Broncos have Cortland Sutton, they have Jerry Jeudy, they have KJ Hamler, they have Tim Patrick, and then they have a bunch of depth guys behind them that can contribute. And really, the Broncos' depth, I mean, they've gotten to that point where you take away KJ Hamler, you take away Jerry Jeudy, you take away Tim Patrick, who you lost before the season. Denver is at the bottom of the depth chart right now, and you're asking a lot for some young guys to have to step up that don't have as much NFL experience. How does that impact an already struggling Broncos offense? I mean, that is a huge question mark at this point in time when we're talking about Denver. So I'm not sure what the fix is here for the Broncos, especially on the offensive side of the ball, but I think we have to kind of look into everything from a 30,000-foot perspective. The Broncos offense at this point seemingly can't put up points when they need them to. And at this juncture, especially with the schedule getting a lot tougher, look, Tennessee's a tough team, and Denver had a chance to beat them. They let it slip through their hands. The Raiders, we do not know what this team is as well. I mean, they're going through their own struggles and peril enough as is, but Denver hasn't beaten them in several years. On top of that, you're going to have to go to Carolina to take on the Panthers in a couple weeks. Then you're on the road once again a few weeks later to take on the Baltimore Ravens on the road. Lamar Jackson, it just doesn't get easier for the Broncos. They simply cannot catch a break, and ultimately it could result in this Broncos season officially being over. Now, even though they're not mathematically eliminated, right now them sitting at 3-6 at this point with a game that was so winnable, unless the Broncos offense all of a sudden flips a switch and plays with zero margin for error, it's unlikely that they make any more noise the rest of the season, especially on offense. So I think that kind of brings Broncos fans' expectations, which were up here, all the way down now. And like I said, Broncos fans were expecting more from this offense. It's just disappointing to see everything that has gone wrong for them on the offensive side of the ball. And certainly I share a lot of Broncos fans' frustration because watching the team on the road and watching them in person, they struggle. They have moments, they have flashes where like, okay, hey, they can do some really promising things. And then there's a breakdown. There's a penalty. There's a bad play. Russ holds onto the ball a little too long in certain situations. And ultimately, what we saw on Sunday was a result of all that compiling into one on top of coaching. I mean, it's just a collective line of issues here for this Broncos football team that simply hasn't equated to it. They came out in this game very pass-centric, very pass-happy, ultimately at the beginning of the game. At one point, they had 16 passing attempts to only 4 rushing attempts at one point of this game here. And then once they got the 10-0 lead, you thought you'd see a little bit more of an emphasis on, running the football against the Tennessee Titans defense that was down without Jeffrey Simmons. Now, granted, Danico Autry and former Bronco DeMarcus Walker, they had a field day against the Broncos here today, but Denver simply could not take advantage of the Titans defense that was down 4 or 5 of their key starters in this matchup. Other guys filled in for the Titans really well, and you know what that equates to, especially when those guys are stepping in for injuries? That's great coaching right there. And so on the other side of things for the Broncos, they simply couldn't overcome that, and they simply couldn't take advantage of a banged-up Titans defense, which ultimately leads to some disappointment here in the eyes of Broncos country. We talked about injuries here with Jerry Jeudy at the wide receiver position. We talked about what it looks like with the depth that they have here for the remainder stretch right now as it pertains to the next couple of weeks. What do they have to build on? I mean, that is, I think, the ultimate question that we will ask this week here, especially with Nathaniel Hackett. We'll get more updates on the injury status of Jerry Jeudy and what the prognosis is a little bit further. But the offensive line, a major concern for this Denver Broncos football team after Sunday's game. A couple of key players, starters on the offensive line that was already banged up as is, went down due to injury. What does the depth look like? What options do the Broncos have right now going forward? We'll dive deeper into that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, folks, let me tell you about Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports done right. With the Prize Picks app, you choose 2 to 5 players that you're focused on heading into the week, and these players will have a projection that's set by Prize Picks, and you simply choose whether or not they will have more or less than their Prize Picks projection, which could allow you to win 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections that are available. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100 with Prize Picks. The Broncos' offensive line is in rough shape after Sunday's loss on the road at Nissan Stadium against the Tennessee Titans. The Broncos dropped to 3-6 on the season. Just want to say thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in to Locked On Broncos, making us your first listen of the day every single day, whether the Broncos win or whether they lose. Thank you for always being here and engaging in the conversation and the discussion with us as well. The Broncos' offensive line is in rough shape after Sunday's loss. They lost Billy Turner, right tackle, to a knee injury. He left the game in the third quarter, and he did not return, which thrust Quinn Bailey into the starting lineup. And I felt like one thing the Broncos did really well is they placed tight ends. They placed Eric Sauber and Eric Tomlinson on Quinn Bailey's side to help him out a little bit there, especially when the Broncos tried to get the run game going. It didn't necessarily put Quinn in some of these one-on-one situations that defense coordinators would like to take advantage of in a situation where your starter goes out. So I'd say that was a good adjustment there by the Broncos, but ultimately it simply did not matter as Russell Wilson was sacked more than 5 times in Sunday's loss. He was hit countless times, and he took shot after shot. And the overall arcing point here is with these injuries, especially with Billy Turner, that's just one part, right? Because you lose Garrett Bowles for the entire season just several weeks ago. He's out for the year. You lose Lloyd Cushenberry. He's going to go on IR for the next 4 games. He's gone for the next 4 games for you, for Denver. And now you're down like his center, Graham Glasgow, stepped up to the plate this week, and he left Sunday's game with a shoulder injury and did not return, which then thrust rookie center Luke Wattenberg in, and he struggled. He struggled in a massive way. For a guy who hasn't gotten any reps with Russell Wilson, it was notable. Now you have to throw him out there in the middle of a game where you're trying to get some rhythm, trying to get some momentum to go downfield to try to win a game. It was a lot for the Broncos rookie. It's a lot to ask on a guy like that. And communication, especially at the center position, between he and the guards, it simply was not up to par when Wattenberg stepped in. And, hats off to Wattenberg for having to step into that situation. But he's going to have to grow into it. And depending on the severity of Graham Glasgow's injury, he's going to have a very, very short learning curve for this Broncos team if the Broncos are hoping to do anything on the offensive side of the ball. One area where Wattenberg struggled the most outside of protection was just getting Russell Wilson the ball. Whether it was in the shotgun, there were a couple low snaps, a little bit of a high snap to the left, to the right, and then even under center. There was a failed exchange there several times there with Russ and Wattenberg. And that simply can't happen because the ball did end up on the ground one time. Luckily, Russell Wilson was able to get on it somehow. Not quite sure how he was able to do that. But, man, just pressure. From the moment that Billy Turner and Graham Glasgow went out of the game, pressure and sacks were just coming left and right for the Titans defense against Russell Wilson. And, there's a thing, right? Russ, I think there's the fine line between Russ holding the ball a little too long and him trying to make a play outside the pocket. And realistically, on a majority of the sacks that he took, it was him trying to make a play. Now, there were just a couple times he just got wham blasted, and the Titans defense, they disrupted the Broncos offensive line, the rhythm. There were several miscommunication errors, as it was pointed out, and it looked like on the field, Dalton Reisner, Quinn Miners, these guys talking with one another alongside with Luke Wattenberg, with the tackles, just communication all down the line simply wasn't there. It wasn't good enough for the Broncos to have a chance to win this game on Sunday. And I think going forward, Russell Wilson has taken about 3 sacks per game, I think minus 1 or 2 games this season. Not ideal, and that's not sustainable. That's not how you're going to win games. And if the offense is ever hoping to get back on track, it starts with the offensive line. But do Broncos fans believe at this point in time, seeing all that they've seen, seeing how the offensive line is right now, you have Calvin Anderson at left tackle, you have Dalton Reisner at left guard, now you're going to have Luke Wattenberg more than likely at the center position, Quinn Miners at right guard, and you're going to have Quinn Bailey stepping up at the right tackle position unless Cam Fleming is fully healthy and ready to go. He'll likely slide over there this week if that is the case. But all of a sudden, the Broncos' offensive line this season has never had a chance to just gel and get chemistry with a true, legitimate starting unit. I believe that they've had 6 or 7 total different starting lineups this season, and now probably going into this upcoming week against the Las Vegas Raiders, they will have an 8th, potentially 9th, depending on who shuffles where and what it may look like. Just not an ideal time right now in Broncos country. Frustration, I would say, is at an all-time high with the fan base, rightfully so. Just one of those things, and, it's disappointing seeing this team perform the way that they are because they have the talent. It's not like the talent is not there. They have the talent, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I can't be too mad at the defense But they did give up some big plays in this game that ultimately were a difference maker. The touchdown before halftime. You also talk about the 63-yard flea flicker. On top of that, more injuries. K'Wan Williams, also another defender who left the game with a knee injury and did not return. Denver is being tested, and not quite sure what's going on with all the injuries, what it's attributed to. I know a lot of people want to say it's the strength and conditioning staff. It could be part of that. That could be a factor into it. But it just doesn't make sense to see why the Broncos right now are the most injured teams. I don't think there's a real legitimate answer out there, but I know the common one we will hear and that we have seen has been the strength and conditioning staff. I don't believe that's the sole reason, folks, but I think it's a contributing factor of a multitude of things. It could be strength and conditioning coach. It could be hydration and diet. It could be field surface. It could be a multitude of things. Did they stretch properly before the game? All these things are all contributing factors here to what we're seeing here with this 3-6 football team. And Broncos country, I think the one question I have for you here on the post-game report, does this loss solidify the season in your opinion? Is the season officially over? What is there to play for this Broncos team? Make sure you drop your comments if you're watching on YouTube down below. If you're listening on your favorite audio podcasting platform, make sure you tweet me on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL. At Locked On Broncos. Real quick, before we get out of here, leaving the stadium, I bumped into a mother and her daughter who listened to the show. And for me, just like, they're like, hey, is that Cody? And I was like, yeah, hey, nice to meet you. They listen to the show every single day. And the fact that they recognize me and stop me makes me grateful that I'm able to do this show, to be able to talk about the Broncos with all of you. And I hope I get to have that same experience with most of you who listen to this show at some point down the road, to where, we can chat. And it just made my day. Kind of just like, okay, hey, the road loss stunk. You hate covering, when a team is losing. But it's just little moments like that that make me grateful to be doing this and to be able to cover this team, to bring you coverage up close and personal every single day. So Broncos country, I want to say thank you so much for tuning in today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Frustration in Broncos country, rightfully so. We'll be back tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show as we get a little bit more updates from Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett on the injury statuses of various players on this Broncos football team. And will there be any changes ahead? That's something you can expect on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.